So, just wanted to let you know we're, yeah.
I like your jacket.
Thank you. Hi. I'm good. How are you?
Hey. Hi.
Hi.
Hey,
Ann.
how was the show?
Hey Kim, how are you?
Our show?
Nice. A lot of cars there.
Yeah. How many?
Probably 250.
Dang. Did you just have the one, or did you put more than
I
one?
just pulled one in.
Yeah. You have a blue one too, right?
I got a blue one, a silver one, and a red one.
Kim, do you want our handouts?
Which
or-
one?
We can take it.
Do they all just stay on the list?
Trying a bunch.
I don't
Sabrina
know
told me
which one.
fifteen.
For
Sabrina
commissioners?
told me
But I
15.
get them out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll talk about the
The
next
weather's
one.
nice.
Nice.
I'd rotate them over into the workshop.
You gonna make it, you can take one out today? It's supposed to be nice.
Get it off really on. Put this together, right?
Got varsity showing up.
Yeah.
How'd the breakfast go?
It's good.
I'm sorry, I missed it.
Here.
It's good.
And the lights are right.
Sorry, you missed it too.
They didn't
Did
have.
you get pictures?
The lights are right. And
Sarah took a couple. I didn't
Lacey
really take-
reversed.
Hey, Commissioner Lopez,
Nice place over here.
can you send me some of those pictures?
Yeah, there's just two. I
That's
mean,
fine, we're gonna post
we
them.
should have taken one, I guess.
Yeah, I didn't even think about it.
We'll post them.
It's a nice spot, isn't it? I'm like, I'm kind of sad that I'm not.
It is nice.
And you only have one person, so, you know, you kind of turn your back and you're not turning your back.
It'll take a little bit of time to get used to that spot going from there to there. That's what I was like, oh my god, I don't have any space.
It's really small.
It is.
Is it by design, so you don't want to sit here for long?
Well, when they first put these up, they had it right here.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's what happens on the end.
I got trash.
Okay, are we on? Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the staff meeting for February the 18th. I want to welcome everyone to the meeting, and I'm going to turn it over to County Manager Stoltz.
Good morning, Chairman and Commission. We have 3 items today for staff discussion. Glenda Martins is here to talk about some corrections board appointments. We'll handle that first. We have a travel policy on the agenda for tomorrow that we have talked back and forth about for a month or so, and it's a finance policy, so Lindsay is here to answer any questions on that particular policy. We'll talk more about that when it comes up. And then we have personnel staff here today, HR staff, to talk about the mandatory vaccine policy for ComCare and the health department. And Sheena is quarantining, so she will remote in on phone. So with that, Glenda, we will let you start us up.
Is it okay if I take my mask down?
Good morning, Glenda.
Good morning, commissioners. It's supposed to be a really nice day today, so that's good. So to start out with, we have 2 vacancies on our Team Justice Juvenile Advisory Board. And if you'll remember, one of those vacant positions is for a teen member. And so I got 8 applications for that position. I interviewed 6. 2 were no-shows. Unfortunately, 2 also were disqualified because they were over the age limit. But I ended up interviewing 4 members and 4 youth. They were all very, very good youth to be interviewing for this position on the board. The person I am recommending today is Cheyenne Burton. She's an 18-year-old female. She resides in District Number 5. She is very interested in giving her opinion and advice on things going on with kids, especially kids her age and in the system. She wants to be a voice for youth, and she wants to also help mentor youth. She is currently a youth involved in our system now, and has a great personality. She is a people person and likes to be vocal and talk to people. She's very confident. She can attend all the meetings and has transportation and can also Zoom to the meetings. So I would recommend that we appoint Cheyenne Burton.
Okay, any questions for Glenda? I don't see any, thank you.
Okay. The second vacant position is vacant because Gil Alvarez, our educational person, left his position to do another position. And so we had an educational vacancy on that board. And I interviewed 2 candidates for the vacancy. And I'm recommending Amanda Kingery. She is currently the assistant superintendent for the Wichita Public Schools. Amanda has a very good understanding of the role of the advisory board, and some of her primary functions have always been working with grants, advocating for youth, and evaluating programs geared for the youth in our community. She loves system-involved youth and feels that she has a big role to play in that process, and that's why she really wants to be on this board. She has a passion for working for kids and has worked with kids in the school system for 25 years. So she has no problem attending the board meetings, and so I would recommend the board appoint her to replace Mr. Alvarez's position.
Any questions? I just have one. I guess Gil Alvarez is assistant superintendent, and Amanda Kingery is assistant superintendent. You said he left his position. I guess I don't understand that.
I think he was promoted up. I don't think he's the assistant anymore. I think he's like a deputy. He got one step up, I think.
Okay.
And he felt like his duties, his role, his position on the board was ending, and he just wanted to go ahead and concentrate on his new role.
Okay, that's fine. I was just clarification. All right. I don't see anything else. I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you so much.
We'll go one out of order here. We don't have travel policy here, so Lindsay's rounding up some travel policy copies. We'll skip to talk about the mandatory vaccine. Anna, is Sheena going to get on, or are you going to?
I believe she was going to get on.
Okay, you want to take the podium?
Good morning, Commissioners. Anna Meyer Hoffcole, your Deputy Chief Human Resources Officer. We are here today to discuss the Omnibus Healthcare Staff Vaccination Interim Rule that was first issued on November 5th, 2021. It was lightly discussed when it was first issued, but of course there was a stay put in place last week. The Supreme Court of the United States upheld this vaccine mandate, and so we are bringing forth to you today our policy to implement this for ComCare and the Health Department, both of which fall under this vaccine mandate because of their participation in Medicare and Medicaid services. Akeem has copies that I believe he just passed out. Within that, you'll see the policy. We have a list of procedures for what will happen, the deadlines and dates that employees need to follow, and then as well as the 2 exemption options that are allowed under this vaccine mandate. The dates were adjusted for the interim rule. The first vaccine or an exemption need to be turned in by January 27th. From there, employees then need to either have their second dose or have received a single dose series, so Johnson & Johnson, by February 28th. The vaccination documentation required is outlined in the policy. What acceptable proof of vaccination would be required. We will have a portal using our HRIS system, that ESS HR focal point system. It came with an option for a vaccine portal, something that they created when the mandate started coming out. So we were able to implement that. We will test this week, so employees will just be able to upload their vaccination documentation. If they are seeking an exemption, then they will send that into HR for our approval. Boosters are not required under this. We are going to track. It is encouraged that we track, but is not a requirement for an employee to be considered compliant. Those employees that are going to be returning from an approved leave of absence will have a short amount of time to comply after February 28th. We also address new employees. We'll be communicating with them, pending your approval of our policy, and making sure that everyone is aware. The 2 exemptions allowed under the vaccine mandate are first a medical exemption under the ADA, and then as well as a religious exemption under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, as well as the recent state bill passed. Employees that are failed to comply, you'll see outlined in our procedures documentation. On March 1st, they will start being issued a final written reprimand. So they kind of get their warning. You need to comply. We either need that exemption form or you need to have received your first dose. On March 7th, if they have not done that within the time, then the separation from employment process will begin because we have to comply. Employees that are not vaccinated are not allowed to provide services within the facility, so they wouldn't be able to do their jobs. And this does impact everyone, whether or not they interact directly with employees. It also impacts any volunteers or students we may have in the facilities, as well as any service providers that contract with us to provide services in the community. They all have to be included under this. Starting on March 7th, we will start the separation from employment process, so we will give them those 6 days to comply. And then on April 4th, we will start separating employees.
Okay. And Commissioner Cruz.
Thank you, Chairman. How many employees does this affect?
Approximately 550.
That's my only question.
of that, how many have not received the vaccine?
We don't know right now. We haven't asked for vaccination documentation before, but as soon as this is passed, we will begin that process.
Okay, and back up a couple steps. This is mandated by the U.S. Department of Health.
It's the Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services.
Okay, and it did go before the Supreme Court, and that was upheld. That's why we're at this position.
Correct.
Okay. Any other questions? Commissioner Howell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So there's a couple of, there's a clause on the religious exemption. Is that language that was given to us, or did we write that language? In the middle of the attestation form?
That is the language from Title VII as well as the state bill.
Okay, so if they fill this out, they don't have to provide any chapter and verse as to the rationale behind their sincerely held religious belief. If they fill this out, it will be approved.
We're asking them to attest.
Right, but it will be approved. There's no scrutiny on our part whether we think they're sincere or not. If they fill this out, it will be approved.
Correct.
Okay. And in doing that, it talks about, I understand, it says, if this is approved, I understand I will be required to wear a face mask and any additional personal protective equipment. Do we know what that is right now?
We don't. The mandate only says that if an employee is not vaccinated, that you need to provide protections in place, and that would include PPE. So those departments can make that determination based on the level of interaction that employee will have with clients.
For example, in some places, they do allow, like, for example, a face shield versus a mask over their mouth and nose. And so I'm just curious about, we need to get those details, I think, before, some people might like to know exactly what's being required of them.
Yeah. The mandate isn't specific, so we're leaving it up to departments, but I can encourage Joan and Adrian to kind of have those conversations with employees that are curious.
And it also goes on to say, I'll do this at all times while let's see here. From a position at all times while working. So again, if they're working by themselves in a place where they're not near around anybody, do we have any relief in that position that can they take their mask off at that moment?
If they're alone in their workstation, yes.
Is that going to be clarified somewhere in the policy? I mean, this is just the attestation form. Does the policy clarify that detail?
That would be up to departments based on that person's work area. If they work in a close work setting where they can't be properly social distanced, that person might need to wear a mask.
Okay. Now, we're obviously in a pandemic still. If in the future the pandemic status changes, do we anticipate this will also change at some point in the future? I mean, this is obviously a pretty hot topic today, but if say 4 months from now, let's say if our numbers are totally different than they are today, do we have any future ideas whether or not this mandate will continue in the future, or is there something? Is this just during the pandemic, when there are emergency operations, or is there some type of future?
I can review the interim final rule with legal again. I do not recall a set end date based on positive cases. So I don't know what their plan would be to repeal.
And then, I guess finally, in terms of the face mask, there's been a lot of news out there lately about different types of face masks and how the efficacy of those different types of masks. Are we going to clarify what type of masks they have to wear if they do wear a mask? Is a cloth mask acceptable, do we know, or?
The mandate does not provide that level of detail. It just requires protections in place, including PPE. And so, once again, that would be up to the department.
Okay, well, I think all right. Rather than terminate someone, I hope that we can find ways to work with them and get them places we are short-staffed, lots of places around the county. If they're not compatible in their current location, I would really like to see us try to move them in a place where there's compatibility. Because we need more people here.
Yeah. If they have a medical exemption under the ADA, they can be moved somewhere else within the county.
But if these employees are under CMS, they can't be moved?
They could be moved.
So they're health employees. I'm sorry. If they're health service employees under CMS, and they are doing the religious exemption, they're not going to be allowed to be moved elsewhere in the county.
They could be moved elsewhere in the county, specifically if they have a medical exemption under the ADA, where they can't be vaccinated, and they would like an option to move elsewhere in the county. If they're qualified, they could be moved outside of ComCare, the health department.
I'm just trying to understand, you said the word medical exemption, let's say they have a religious exemption, what about then? Do they also be allowed to be moved?
They can apply for other positions. We would work with them. ADA is the only one where we would, as part of the process, look for another position for them.
All right, I guess as we get started into this, I hope you keep us up to date on the numbers so we know what our potential losses will be. Thank you so much.
Commissioner Cruz?
Thank you, Chairman. Just one point of clarification. These dates are fixed dates as of today. What happens with a new hire that gets hired in the next week? Or so do we have those new timelines set, and what would those be depending on start dates?
So our employment department will work with employees being hired once this policy is passed to let them know of these requirements. So they will know that they need to come in starting January 27th with their first vaccination, or we can go ahead and get them the exemption forms beforehand. New employees after February 28th, same process. They will either need to come in fully vaccinated, or they will need to have submitted and have an approved exemption before their start date.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I just have one last question. I agree with Commissioner Howell. After January 27th and February 28th, can you update us on the numbers?
Of course.
Okay. I don't see any other questions. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Howell.
Yeah, just that latter date. So again, on that first date, they actually have to have the J&J or the first dose of a Moderna or Pfizer. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And so if they go for the J&J, this still has to be done by the end of January. Okay. I understand. I just want to make sure I understood. I get it now. Thank you so much.
Okay. Now I don't see any other questions. Thank you, Anna. Appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you, commissioners.
Thank you.
I have a question, sorry.
Oh, of course.
Commissioner Lopez.
On the procedure, it says that for J&J or a single dose doesn't need to be done until February 28th. Is that correct, or do they need to have that by?
It would be February 28th
Okay.
for the J&J.
So if they don't make the January 27th deadline, they could do the J&J just as long as it's before the February 28th.
Right.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Manager Stoltz.
I was just checking with Sheena. She said Anna covered it all, so she didn't have any comments. Okay. Next, we'll talk about the travel policy, the proposal of the travel policy for commission meeting this morning. Let me give just a bit of a background on this. Lindsay has done, and her team have done extensive work on the travel policy over the last several months, and she's taken one very complicated policy and made it into some separate and distinct, easier to follow policies. During this discussion, we had conversation about adding commissioners to this policy as far as their travel protocol and policy. And after a lot of discussion, I think we're just going to carve that away from this employee travel policy and create a commission travel policy which stands on its own. So I will be getting with you in the next few weeks to talk about the shaping of that particular policy. The policy as it exists before you today, 2.106, is going to, and Lindsay will cover this, we need a little bit of scope change in this because as of last week, we had the commission written in, and then we wrote them out, and we did not change the scope. So I'll have Lindsay talk about those changes here when she discusses this, and then she can answer any questions you may have also.
Okay. Morning, Lindsay.
Good morning, Chairman. Good morning, Commissioners. So, as Tom has already given you extensive background, I probably won't go much into process. This has been in the works for years, though, literally, so I want to give good kudos to our team who has worked diligently to make sure this is consistent with best practices and audit requirements, IRS regulations, and everything else. So, as Tom says, on the travel expense policy, which is one of 3 that we'll ask you to approve tomorrow to replace our current travel and business meeting expense policy, we will need to add something that says that the Board of County Commissioners is exempt from this policy. If you see, it says in the second line right now, it includes but not limited to elected and appointed officials, divisions, and departments. And so right now, based on that wording, you would be included. The current policy does include you, but as Tom said, we will work on adding a new policy that will govern your travel at some point. I think In terms of changes from what existed before, there aren't many, but I would say there is one substantive change. And that is on page 2 for means of payment. B1, per diem. So the county over time has vacillated between wanting to do very specific expense reimbursement and then doing per diem reimbursement. So per diem is based on the site to which you travel. The IRS has standard amounts for meals and incidentals that are approved each year. And so because of the sheer amount of workload associated with the county when it's in its normal travel state, every single itemized receipt that comes in is checked and evaluated to make sure it's compliant. We make sure every tip is compliant. And so that can be a lot of documentation to review. And so what we would like to shift to is per diem. So if an employee stays overnight at a hotel, attends a conference, then they would be entitled to submit for per diem. In addition, the county could purchase, if they were flying, we could use a P card to purchase their plane. We could use a P card to purchase their taxis and other things, but the meals and incidentals would be covered by per diem. So that is probably the biggest change, is that we are now encouraging that. Other changes include on page 3, miscellaneous H, conference registration. In the past, the county has not paid for social events, but we recognize in finance that networking, establishing relationships and networks with other members is an important part of why we send people to physical conferences. And so now the county will allow that. We will not pay for pre or post-conference when the conference is not actually in session. And we also will not pay for anything, of course, with alcohol. That is not a change. So those are the highlights of the travel policy. Everything else is basically the same as what it was before. We expect everyone to exercise discretion, purchase only those things that are necessary, treat it like it's their own money. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions on the first portion? Commissioner Meitzner.
Thank you, Chairman. Lindsay, I agree. I'm very familiar in my previous life with travel, and the per diem world is much simpler for bookkeeping and for the person. And it often, and there's a federal link. There's an easy one to go to see. Now, what I'm used to sometimes, well, the hotel costs would be different in different cities. So the hotel and the travel, plane, whatever, is separate from the per diem.
Right. Per diem
So the per
only
diem is
covers meals and incidentals.
Everything else, right.
Yes.
So yeah, if you get your shoes shined or anything else while you're there, then it's part of the per diem.
Yes.
Right. I think that's a good move for you and for everybody.
Thank you.
One question following up on Commissioner Meitzner's. Lodging, there is also a standard rate for lodging based on your destination. Why didn't you incorporate that? Why are you doing actual expenses?
I think for purposes of this, what we encourage for lodging is that folks will stay at the conference hotel in order to cut down on travel and other things, those incidental costs. And so that is why we have asked folks to stay there. We will use, for lodging, we will use the actual cost of a hotel typically, because we would expect that would be paid on a county P card or on a county travel card. So maybe you don't have a specific card that's assigned to you. And so we are paying the actuals in that case. We could certainly, if the commission chose to, we could limit that to the amount that is allowed, I guess, under the federal rules or the suggested rate. But we found that oftentimes the conference hotel does not have that lower rate.
Okay, and we don't ever have anyone travel other than on conferences, on just normal travel for some other business purpose?
We don't. I would say the vast majority of our travel would be conferences. We do occasionally have something, but I would say that would be more at an elected official level, not so much a county normal day-to-day staff member.
Okay. Well, I'm used to per diem and travel, but I always had to watch where I was staying for hotels also, so that I didn't go above my per diem rate. So that's just the only reason I was asking that question. I don't see any other questions on, Commissioner Howe.
Thank you, Chairman. So, on page 2, top of the page, it says that employees have the following options. And it says both options may be used on one trip. That seems a little bit additional complexity. So can you explain, so does that mean like one day they would use per diem and the next day they would have receipts? What do you mean by that?
I suppose that could be the way it's interpreted, and we can tighten that language if necessary, but the idea would be if the employee maybe uses a reimbursement, they use their own personal card for their lodging. And so we reimburse them for their lodging, but then they submit per diem for their meals and incidentals. We would allow both of those things. We wouldn't expect them to do a fully reimbursable trip or a full trip where they only use P card. They could use a combination of P card with per diem, if that makes sense.
I guess my concern is that the way this is written right now, and again, maybe you see the flaw here then, but it looks to me like they have the option of turning in receipts for meals. And
Yes.
the assumption is, I know how people think a little bit, I suppose, but if the meals are above the per diem rates, they're likely to do that. If the receipts are lower than those per diem rates, they'll just tell you to give a per diem rate for that day, whatever. So I expect that we'll see some people trying to do both, whatever benefits that person, the most. I would assume there's going to be some thought to that probably. So I guess I would just rather settle on one or the other, but it seems like to mix this up would be really burdensome for you all.
If it's okay, I will talk with our staff and figure out if there's some good language that would clarify the intent for how that would work. That for one trip, you would either select per diem or reimbursement for meals, for example. That's the area where I see the biggest risk, I think, is just those meals and incidentals.
Is it our intent, basically, we're going to try to do per diem most of the time for most travel?
Yes, that is our
And
preference.
Why would we need to have receipts ever? I mean, is there ever a case where we would have to do receipts in that? I mean, why would we still keep that option?
When we did listening sessions with departments and the department managers, there are some departments, because this comes from their budget, that want a lot more strict scrutiny on what their employees are buying and doing, and so they didn't want to do per diem. They wanted to have precise costs.
I guess me personally, as long as it falls within their per diem numbers, I don't care what they do with their money. I mean, you pay the per diem rates, and if they buy a cheap meal at McDonald's and pocket the rest, which is what they do, I know they do that. I've been on lots of travel in my past life. I know when they're on per diem, that's what they do. They'll pocket the per diem numbers and dollars the best they can and skip meals. And if they pay receipts, then they'll usually go very, very nice meals and intend to not miss a meal. So I don't know that I care. If we just settle on per diem rates and what they do with that money, I really don't care. I think we just need to pay it and simplify this a little bit. And so I would rather eliminate the receipt option.
I think the other, as I'm thinking back through this, another issue is that some employees may not have the cash on hand to pay for their meals for a full trip and wait for per diem reimbursement when they return. So that would be one challenge where we would want, I think, there to be an exception.
Do they still have a company-issued credit card at that point?
Not everyone does. If you recall, after our not-so-fun 2016 audit, we did a pretty big cutback on who actually has a P card in this organization.
So once in my past, I think I lived in a world that had this kind of an issue, and I think that in that case, the employee was allowed to request advance payment for the travel, and we would actually, I was the employee that traveled, but that was an option to us. We could do it after the fact to settle up with the company, or we could request, some advance pay to cover that. It was really just you fill out a form and they would just cut you a check on the spot. So it wasn't a big deal. Almost nobody ever did that. So it might, again, I'm just trying to keep things simple. So maybe we ought to look at maybe ways to deal with that issue to the extent it exists at all. I would be surprised if any employees really that don't have some way to pay for meals on a short trip. But if it exists, we can create some solution to that potentially. All right. Thank you, Chairman.
All right, thank you, Lindsay, and I think it's going to be some confusion if we offer two different ways of paying for something on one trip. So you might take a look at that.
Okay, happy to.
All right, you ready for B?
Absolutely.
All right.
So the next policy is our business-related expenses. And that's, I assume, when you talk about B, Exhibit B. Okay. So this policy is a little different than what we have had before in terms of what exactly counts as a business-related expense. I will highlight a couple of things here. First of all, item, 5D on page 2 of this policy, unauthorized expenses. That is not a change. Alcoholic beverages still are prohibited. Then if we go to the next page, the top of page 3, number 2 and number 3, I want to highlight both of those for folks. With supervisor approval, meals associated with professional organization meetings are authorized as business-related expenses. But then number 3 is a bit of a change. It's just become much more explicit of what's allowed because there's been a lot of confusion. Meals, snacks, coffee, or water purchased by county staff or county staff while in Sedgwick County are generally not allowed. The exception is that if it is provided for the convenience of conducting county business. And so as a part of audit documentation, we'll want to make sure that folks have that as to how it relates to convenience. But typically we want to discourage just feeding Sedgwick County employees with county taxpayer funds. Recognition expenses. We get a ton of questions about what's allowed for a retirement party because it can vary from department to department. And so we have been very explicit with exactly what is allowed for a retirement event in B1A. And it also limits that county funds cannot be used to purchase a retirement gift beyond what HR already purchases, again, in the interest of making sure all departments are treating employees fairly. B2, occasions that are personal in nature. We won't use county funds to celebrate those for birthdays, marriages, or other things. And then flowers. This is another area where there's quite a bit of discrepancy across the organization about who benefits from this. Some departments buy flowers, some departments do not. Sometimes it can be for parents, sometimes it varies. And so what we decided to do as a matter of simplicity is if we have a county employee who passes away, the manager's office is in a position to know that and will coordinate the delivery of flowers in that event only. Otherwise, if a department wants to purchase flowers to honor a death or something, then they may do so, but they need to collect personal funds to do that. So I think those are the biggest changes. And then the final one, Exhibit C, is mileage reimbursement. This is really not much of a change. I think the only thing that I would want to highlight here, because we've gotten a lot of questions, is on page 2 of the mileage policy. The top paragraph says the employee's primary work location is based upon the location mentioned in the employee's job description. If an employee is being allowed to work remotely from home, but the job description does not state it is a permanent remote position, the starting and ending location for mileage submission is what's listed on the job description on E-Line. So that means that if someone lives in Keachai and drives out to Goddard, but their normal work site is this courthouse, they would be reimbursed for the amount from this courthouse to the business meeting as opposed to from their home in Keachai there. And that is compliant with IRS regulations. We will plan to bring this back to you if the IRS regulations change. So those are the highlights from the policies that we'll bring you tomorrow, and I'm happy to answer any additional questions.
Questions for the commission? Commissioner Howell?
Thank you, Chairman. So if I feel like I need to buy something, let's say at an office supply store, for example, to do my job. In the past, when I've done that, I've done this very rarely, just a couple times in all my years of being here. But it's turned out there's always an issue of sales tax.
Yes.
And we have a sales tax exemption card we're supposed to show them. A lot of these retailers also have rules, and you have to fill out things and have things, approved ahead of time, so to speak. If someone doesn't get that done quite right, is I assume that's still an issue in this policy?
Absolutely, and that's because state law says the county can't pay sales tax.
Yeah, there's been times it's been like, 25 cents of sales tax, but it was a problem. So we spent $100 trying to fix 25 cents type of deal. Okay. Is that true, whether it's done through a P card or through a personal credit card, either, it's the same problem?
The only exception is policy does allow under reimbursement that if an employee pays for sales tax out of their own pocket, then the county will reimburse them for that. But otherwise, the policies call that for employees to do their very best and to be able to show that they did their very best to get the sales tax removed if they paid for that with a county P card or any other county-funded mechanism.
Well, it's difficult enough when you make a one-off purchase like that for 25 cents. It's just not worth the trouble. So I'll just pay for it out of my own pocket. And then with the meals, it's talking about meals down here. If there's sales tax on meals, I guess that's not part of that?
No, any sales tax within the state of Kansas is problematic for us. We did get dinged for that in an audit, and so that is why we take this so seriously.
All right. Well, I'm not completely clear on all this policy, but I'll chew on it some more. Thank you for your answers.
Other questions? I have one. It goes back to some of the discussions in the past, and it relates to ComCare, where they take private-owned vehicles out to help some of the clients. Are they traveling from their home or from here, are those ComCare folks traveling from ComCare, or are they traveling from their home when they do this after duty hours?
I will defer to Tim on that. I don't know how they do the after-duty hours.
Good morning, Commissioners. Tim Kaufman, Deputy County Manager. Pre-pandemic, almost all of the travel that was client-related would have originated from a work site. The staff would have been dispatched from a work site. We do have some staff that are able to do some work from home right now, and so it would be a little bit different during the pandemic. We may have a rare occasion, but again, it would still be a rare occasion for someone to leave from their home to pick up a client to transport them.
Okay. Well, what you said is that the people wouldn't be able to travel, get mileage from their house. It'd be from their work site, so that might be a little different for some of the ComCare folks. So that's what I was getting at. But it also, I still have some significant problems with using POV for some of those types of trips. I don't know what the solution is, whether we need to get something in the budget to allow a government vehicle for that type of travel, but I think it sets us up for a liability when we're using POVs for official business.
We've had a number of discussions, and I'm sure we'll have more discussions about that particular issue.
Okay. Well, thank you. Anything else, Lindsay?
No, sir, not from me.
All right, thank you. Mr. Stoltz? All right, anything from the commission? I don't see anything. We'll see everyone tomorrow at 9 o'clock for a Board of County Commissioners meeting. Thank you. This is adjourned.